Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, a follow-up video. In my previous video, I covered the subject of compact and repair, and it was a high-level introductory overview of what the command is. I really didn't dive into any technicalities, and I did that on purpose. Not every video I'm going to do is going to be some major deep dive for advanced users. Sometimes I am going to do some videos for novices. Just as a reminder here, I had the video, and recently to support the video, I've released an article that covers most of what was discussed, and there are a few additional pieces of information, like quotes from Microsoft and things like that. Back to the subject at hand today, though, is that video did receive a couple negative comments that I hadn't gone in depth enough, specifically that I hadn't covered, for instance, what causes the bloating that then requires compacting and repair. And obviously there's always differences in philosophies. Some people saying, that compact and repair should be a regular thing. I completely disagree. Compact and repair shouldn't be required on a frequent basis. And if your database is growing continuously, then you have an issue in your fundamental design that needs to be addressed, more than just band-aid patching it with compact and repair every day or every time you close it. We're going to get into that in just a moment. So basically today is almost like a part two to, I guess, do the deep dive a little bit and look at what causes, or at least what are the common causes of database bloating. I'm sure there are a few others that I have missed, and feel free to drop me a comment. But basically, the ones I'm going to cover today are the well-established causes for database bloating. And so let's dive in. The first thing we need to understand, especially if we're a new database user, database developer, is what is the term bloating mean when we're talking about a Microsoft Access database. And in reality, it's no different than the, I guess you'd say, medical term, where you feel enlarged, and it's the same thing with a database. It's a database growing, the growth of a database. Now, some, I guess, bloating, it's excessive growth. It's a growth that you're not expecting, or that is continuous and uncontrolled. Databases grow. That's normal. As we add data to it, the database is going to expand. Bloating is going beyond what is expected. For instance, I insert a 1 megabyte image, and the result is my database has grown 25 megabytes. Well, that to me might be triggering some alarm bells, because if I now insert 100 images, my database has just exploded. And that's what database bloating is. It's this growth of a database, and in most cases, it's one that we don't control or fully understand as to why it's growing. I added a little bit of text, and the next thing I know, my database is 30 megs bigger. Why? What's going on? So it's this unnatural, unexpected growth. And basically, if you allow bloating to go on unchecked, so without doing compact and repairs, or without addressing the underlying root cause of the bloating, your database will continue to grow. And at a certain point, if you're not lucky, you're going to exceed the 2 gigabyte file size limit, and then you've got a database that no longer works. Obviously, no one wants to get to that point, and realistically, databases, Access databases at least, should never even approach the 2 gig limit. And if ever you are faced with that, you first obviously compact and repair and see if you can recover some of that space, and then perhaps address bloating. But if you truly have that quantity of data, then you need to be looking at another backend, and start thinking of SQL Server, Express SQL Server, the PostgreSQL, MySQL, the Azure. You've got lots and lots of options, but Access is no longer the appropriate choice for you. Okay, so enough chit chat. We have a basic understanding of what bloating is. Now let's dive into what causes bloating. And there are several well-known, well-established things that cause bloating. First and foremost is the record locking that you choose to use in your database. Basically, Microsoft Access by default sets you up for a fall. And they set it up so then the record locking is set to open record level locking, or some people also have called row level locking. And this causes database bloating. And as a quote that I have there from Albert, you should normally disable this option. There are always, like everything else, you have to evaluate what you're doing, but in most cases this should be disabled. So let's just take a look. I show you here how to get to it, but let's take a look in a database. So we go into our options, we go into client settings, and you just scroll all the way down to the bottom. And you'll see here this option under advanced, that open databases by using record level locking. Now you want to make sure this is not checked. Uncheck it if it is checked. And then you have to restart Access for it to take effect. One thing that's important to know, however, about this option, this setting, is that if you're in a multi-user environment, which most Access databases are, and even if you've taken the steps to disable, uncheck that option, so you no longer have it set to use it, if the person that connects to the database ahead of you has that option enabled, and they connect first, the database will now use record level locking. Therefore, what you've chosen in your options will not take effect. You're still going to see the bloating. So the important thing here to understand, obviously, is you need to do this change in settings for Access enterprise-wide, or at least throughout your users. So this is a great time for group policies and things like that to disable it throughout Office in the entire company. So this, as you can see, is a very well-known culprit for database bloating, and it's an easy fix. There's no reason for this to be an issue. So just go in, change the setting, and let's move on. The next two items, I'm going to put them together here, is the insertion and deletion of records and the insertion and deletion of database objects. What happens in a database, well, at least in Access, when you go in and you delete records, it doesn't actually remove them from the file and clean up after itself. It sort of just marks them as this one is no longer active and hides it. But the data is still there. And that's what actually allows us, with certain techniques, to recover deleted records, because they're not gone. They're still there in the background. So what happens if you do continuously deleting records, inserting records? Well, the deleted stuff is still there and you just keep building and building, but the old stuff is still there. So the database keeps growing and growing. The better approach, the approach to, try to privilege as much as possible, is not to do deletions. You want to, as much as possible, only perform updates and inserts. If you do lots of deletions, then you have to do compaction. There's no way around it to recover that space. Do note when you compact, it clears out all of those deleted items, those deleted objects, so they're no longer recoverable. So if ever you do accidentally delete something and you're hoping to be able to recover it one day, make sure you do not perform that compact and repair, or it will be gone forever. Make a backup. And make sure you keep a safe backup of before any compaction is done, so then you have a chance with certain tools to perform recovery. Now, if you're in the situation where you have to do mass imports and there's no way around this insert and deletion, and I'm going to say this is extremely rare, okay? Then you have to really start looking at using a temporary database. Now, what is a temporary database? It's a secondary database that gets attached to your front end or back end, however it works, and you use it to do all these temporary operations and manipulations and insertions and deletions. That way, when you're done your session, that database that's you used for this purpose, so you knew it was going to bloat, you literally just do away with it. It gets deleted. And every time you launch your database, your front end, the user gets a new fresh copy. So they always have an optimized version of this temporary database for doing all sorts of manipulations. And then when you're done, it just gets flushed. That way your real front end, your main front end, never gets impacted by bloating. But like I said, this is extremely, extremely rare. To truly need to perform mass inserts and deletes is a rare thing. And if you're faced with this, I urge you to take a step back and try to come up with a different approach, because typically there are better ways of handling it than just going in and doing insertions and deletions. And sometimes, asking on a forum, I'm faced with this. This is the route I was thinking of going, but I don't like it, or I know it's going to cause bloating, or does anyone have, see any issues with this approach, or is there a better way? 5 minutes in a forum can really, really save you a lot of hassles. There are lots of really remarkable developers out there, and they're willing to help you and offer you guidance if you're willing to take a moment to ask. So don't knock sometimes before diving headfirst into these projects to post a question on a forum, just to get a second and third opinion on what you're going to be trying to do. In the same line of thought are insertion and deletion of database objects. Now, this is not something I've seen a lot of, but I have come across it. And I've been in a scenario where I took over a database where the developer actually copied like a master report. Whenever you clicked on different reports, he had like a master version, and then he'd copy it, manipulate it a bit, and then he'd display it to you, and then when you closed it, it got deleted. It was just a horrendous way to do things. There's no reason in a production database to be copying objects frequently and later deleting them. It makes no sense. So do not do it. There's no case scenario that I can come up with where this is something you should be doing in production. So once again, insertion and deletion of records, highly improbable that you need it. If you need it, look and turn towards using temp databases, ask on forums for some advice. Insertion and deletion of database objects is just simply there is no possible case scenario where this is required. So switch your approach. Don't do it. Another very common source of database bloating is simply improper VBA coding. Now, if you're going to open record sets to work with them, let's say in DAO and things like that, then just be sure to close the record set when you're done. And I privilege also setting your all your object variables to nothing when you're done with that as well. With the exception, like I said, of using self-healing object variables. That's a different scenario, and they only get set to nothing when you are completely done with the database or when the database closes. But otherwise, in standard functions and subs and things like that, you should be closing and setting your variables to nothing immediately. And the best way to do that is through your error handler to make sure that all scenarios, both when your code executes properly, but also when your code breaks, that there is a validation in there to ensure that the close happens. I've seen lots of code where, sadly, when an error happens, it jumps over the close portion of the code, leaving these record sets open. And anyway, long story short, if you look at the quote, you can even click on the link here to go to the full article. But if you're leaving your record sets open and things like that, you will be causing database bloating in your database. Another one is using, quote unquote, virtual queries. Basically, if you're running queries in VBA and things like that, that aren't saved as queries, so they're, in VBA, things like that, well, that takes up workspace. Access has to allocate space to do it and whatnot, and that causes bloating. Obviously, doing once or twice isn't the end of the world, but there are scenarios I've seen databases where every single form, every single report, it's insane. Everything was done virtually. So as much as possible, you want to save this to disk, so save them as actual queries, and then use them as the record sources in your forms, in reports, and things like that directly, instead of making this all hidden in VBA. It also makes it easier to maintain. So another easy one to address in a general sense. Sharing the database. I don't know how many times we have to go over this. We don't share Access databases. We don't share front-end databases, okay? Each user needs to have their own local copy of the front end. Otherwise, if you're sharing them, you're leading to all sorts of problems, file locking, corruption, and of course, you're looking at bloating, yes. So another common issue, but it's a very, very simple one to fix. So please don't share the front-end databases. I'm just going to scroll down and then we'll come back up here, but I'm just going to show you three very similar issues here. We're looking at images, we're looking at attachments, we're looking at OLE objects, okay? Why? Well, these are three objects, items, files, however you want to name it, that we're inserting into the database. So basically, when we insert things into the database, we are going to cause the database to grow. Text is cheap, doesn't take a lot of room. But when you get into binary files and just image files, attachments, zips, video, whatever you're trying to attach to your database, that's a lot more costly. And the way to handle this, I know in 2007, Microsoft came out with the revolutionary data type attachments. Read my article, okay? They're not what you should be doing, okay? And the same for images and OLE objects. What you should be doing is save those files, allow your user to pick the file, then copy it onto a folder that you control on the server, organize it properly. You can rename files, you can create folder structures. Like, be intelligent here, organize it properly. You can even add encryption. There's all sorts of things you can do, but save it on the server. Then all you do in your database is save the path and the file name as plain text, which doesn't take up a lot of room. And then you have full access to the file. You can still display those images. You can still display those files. There's no issue there. You don't lose any functionality whatsoever. What you do, though, is you gain the benefit on your database not growing, not bloating. And you also gain on the end of being able to put on the shoulders of IT to do the backup, let's say, of those file folders and things like that. I also find sometimes it can be beneficial from an updating standpoint, where sometimes you can, depending on the structure and things like that, but you can sometimes just go into the file structure and replace an image and it's automatically been updated in the database. You don't have to go in and mess around. Obviously that isn't something you always want to be doing or allowing your users to do, but from an administration standpoint, sometimes it can be a little easier. Just as an example, as I have noted here, I not very long ago in reality had a client approach me with a database that was 1.7, 1.8 gigabytes in size. It was huge, absolutely huge. And I analyzed the database, found the images contained, and saved them to disk, and they were huge. And then when you insert them, they take up even more room. Long story short, I simply optimized the images. I reduced their sizes to what they needed in the database to be. So there's no point having a poster size image if you're just putting in the top corner, 1-inch corner of a report, you know, your logo. So you optimize the images, you reduce them in size, reduce them in quality, whatever, and save them. Also just changing the file format sometimes, you know. Some images are better as JPEG, some are better as GIF, some are better as PNG, or the new WebP format. So you find the optimal way, you optimize your images, and then you reinsert those images, do your compact and repair, and lo and behold, I dropped that database down to 85 megabytes. I actually think it was a little bit lower than that. But just to go and show you a real life case of the impact of images and how you insert them into a database. So it really is a component that people just don't seem to look into very much. People just drop images or any attachment into a database, and they never think twice about how it's being used and, you know, what they're inserting, what file size and things like that. And this is why I much prefer the approach of allow your users, you know, give them the file dialog to go find their files, their images, and then just move them, copy them over to a controlled location on the server and just save the path and file name. And it has zero impact on your database, zero. So images, very simple fix. Attachments, very simple fix. Ole objects, same thing, except as I said here, Ole objects are evil. Stay away at all costs. I prefer you use attachments or images rather than Ole objects. And you can read my article here if you want to learn as to why. But still, stay away from attachments and images as well. The secondary point with regards to images specifically is, as you can see here, there is a change, a property that you can switch that can also impact the size, the bloating that occurs from images if you're going to absolutely insist on having images. So let's go take a look quickly where that's located. If I open up my options, I go into current database and we scroll down just a little bit. It's in the first section here, application options, but at the bottom you have this picture property storage format. As much as possible, you want that first option, preserve source image formatting, smaller file size. Obviously, if you are in the rare exceptional case right now of still supporting Access 2003 and earlier, well then you don't have a choice. You're going to have to use the version that, you know, has more bloating and converts everything over to bitmaps. Bitmaps are larger file sizes, but otherwise make sure this guy here is checked or picked. Moving on, so we've covered these three. You can look at all the articles I have in link. The last point here is the track name autocorrect. Now, I've always disabled this option, going way back when there were issues with it. It could cause corruptions. That isn't so much an issue today. However, I was unaware, but doing research, I found out that apparently many people have linked track name autocorrect info to bloating. So I guess another reason for disabling it. And as you can see here, once again, it's not hard to disable. It's in the same location, options, current database, and we just scroll down and you'll see there's a section here, name autocorrect options. You want to make sure this top one here, track name autocorrect info, is unchecked. Lastly, if you keep going just a little bit lower, I provide a little tidbit of code that I made up that will check those three settings, the client setting and the two current database settings, and it will spit out here a quick resume of the status, and it will tell you if it's okay or potential bloating issue, and then you can pick and choose if you want to make a switch or not. So it's just a quick little sub you can just execute, and it will print this out into the immediate window for you to instantaneously know. Or you can also, like I showed, manually go and inspect the settings in the options. It's not very hard. And that's the bulk of it. That truly is a summary of the most common sources of database bloating, in Access at least. And as you've seen, they're all pretty much avoidable. Okay, a few settings to change, and then it's a question of approaches. You know, there is zero reason to be inserting and deleting database objects on a regular basis. Releasing your memory code, VBA, that's just poor coding. So you have to clean up your coding a little bit. So, you know, images, Ole objects, attachments, well, that can all be avoided very easily. So basically, these are known issues, but most of them are easy to remedy. So, you know, change your approach, but basically, if ever you're faced with bloating, go through this checklist one by one and see if any of these apply to you. If they do, well then you've got to look at changing things or changing the way you do things. And like I said, I mentioned it earlier, you know, the forums are a great source of information too. If none of these seem to apply, or if one of them does but you don't know exactly how to change your approach, go and ask in a forum. There are lots of people there that are going to be more than willing to try to offer you some advice, offer you their experience and knowledge, and it costs you nothing to ask a question in a forum. So I'm going to stop there. Those are the main reasons. I will have the link to this and my other articles in the description below, and I hope this helps a few of you out there. Thank you very much, as usual, for spending some time with me today. Have a great day, guys, and we'll see you in the next one. If you don't mind, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Your support is the only way this channel keeps moving forward. Have a great weekend.